Good afternoon, Reverend Oliver. It is certainly a pleasure being here in your home to do this interview. I'd like to start, Reverend Oliver, asking you how old are you today?
I am 88 years old.
88 years old. Tell me a little bit about your life, where you were born, when you were born, and the surroundings about the conditions in which the town and place you were born.
I was born in Birmingham, Alabama on February 28, 1925, one of a family of 9 children, and my father and mother lived to be, my mother lived to be 89, my father lived to be 67. We grew up in Birmingham, one of the most segregated cities of the South, so we knew segregation. We knew it inside and out. And we grew up there and experienced much of what Negroes had to experience in the South. It was right there and very strong in Birmingham, Alabama. I grew up under, as a young man, under the reign of Bull Connor as the Commissioner of Public Safety in Birmingham, who became notorious for his use of dogs and fire hoses in 1963. So he was a staunch segregationist, a hater of black people. But we were not known as black people then. We were Negroes. I grew up where the word Negro was the accepted term to describe the people who had slave ancestry. There was no conflict with that word. That was the proper word. Black was not to be used when I was growing up. That was a fighting word. It wasn't until the 1960s that black became a more acceptable word for people who were formerly called Negroes. But when I grew up, we were all Negroes.
How were Negroes treated? What was the life of a daily Negro? What was the daily life of a Negro?
We had to live in segregated areas. Negroes lived together. They did not live in white areas. There were white areas in Birmingham all over the city, and there were Negro areas. So there were segregated buses. You had to go to the back seat and fill up from the back. There were segregated fountains. If you went downtown to shop, you could not use the fountain that was marked white. You had to use the one that was marked colored. And that's interesting that they used the term colored when it came to buses, to water fountains, and the separation of the races. They used the term colored then, not Negro. I haven't yet found out why, but somehow we moved from small letter Negro to capital letter Negro, and then to colored, and to African American, and Afro American, and in the 60s, black, and we've gone through all of those changes. However, the term Negro as used in the Dred Scott decision of 1857 was the term that was accepted and used by the slaves and the descendants of slaves.
Now, when you said the Dred Scott decision of 1857, what was the Dred Scott decision and how did it impact on African people, black people, Negroes?
Well, Dred Scott grew up in slavery in Missouri, and he left there and went outside and was in territory that was supposed to have been free. And then he was sold back to Missouri, and he claimed that he had experienced freedom and that he was a free man and no longer a slave because he had lived in free territory. And he went to court with this, and his lawyers defended him, and the courts ruled in his favor. However, when it came to the Supreme Court, it was ultimately appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in 1857 came out with the Dred Scott decision written by Justice Roger Taney. And basically that decision is summed up in these words: a Negro has no rights that a white man is bound to respect.
And how was that played out before and after that decision in terms of having no rights? For an example, what would life be like in Alabama during your time and your father's time with no rights? What do you mean, no rights?
Literally no rights. Literally no rights. When the Constitution was established, Negroes were not even considered fully human. They were considered chattel slavery. And they had no rights. They didn't have a right to life. They didn't have a right to liberty. They had no right to pursue happiness. They were cattle, looked upon as cattle, and treated as cattle, and that meant that they had no rights at all. And that's constitutional, because the Constitution does not grant any rights to slaves. The Constitution arranged for the cessation of the slave trade, but it never arranged for the end of slavery. And that still exists today. And that Dred Scott decision was the supreme law of the land. It was a ruling of the Supreme Court. And a ruling of the Supreme Court is the law of the land until it has been overruled by a subsequent decision. So there has never been a decision of the Supreme Court to overrule the Dred Scott decision, which means that it is still constitutional. It is still the law of the land today. And the treatment that the descendants of slaves experience by law under this country, or in this country and under this Constitution, bear out the fact that Negroes have no rights that a white man is bound to respect. And that's why someone like Zimmerman could just go up to a Negro youth and get into an altercation with him, shoot him dead, and walk away. And the local authorities did not even arrest him until there were many demonstrations all over the country demanding that Zimmerman be arrested and tried. And then he was arrested and tried, and under the laws of the state of Florida, which fit in with the Constitution, it turned out that Trayvon Martin had no rights whatsoever. He had no rights to resist a quote-unquote white man or to fight a white man. So a white man had a right to kill him, and he did kill him, and he got away with it. And it's thought to be constitutional. It is deadly wrong, but this Constitution was deadly wrong in the beginning. It never got off on the right foot, and it always looked upon slaves and the descendants of slaves as chattel property, chattel slavery. And it is not much different today when it comes to the law.
Now, when you say chattel, that means what?
Cattle slavery, animal slavery. They had no rights.
So if the white man wanted to rape a black woman, if he wanted to kill you, if he wanted you to work from sun up to sundown, kind of be a little more explicit.
That's exactly what could happen. He could rape a white woman, a black woman, pardon me. A black woman had no rights whatsoever. So it was not wrong for a white man to rape a black woman. And that went on consistently year for 400 years in this country. And it has been such a prevalent and ever-present reality that the people who came here from Africa, who were black-skinned, that has all been wiped out through the raping and sexing of black women by white men.
Now, when you grew up and became, well, tell me a little bit about your growing up and how you got involved in the civil rights movement.
Well, I grew up in an area called Titusville, Alabama, or Titusville, Birmingham. That was the Negro section of Birmingham, where the population was Negro. I grew up there, and we knew everyone in the community. Everyone knew us. And if we did something that a community person knew that our parents didn't like, they would call our parents and let them know. And we would get a whipping when we got home. It was just that close. We knew everybody and everybody knew us. So it was a kind of, in a way, it was a village. The village raised the children, and the adults looked out for everybody. And it was, in a way, it was an escape to communityhood, getting away from segregation and being together. We had a Negro community, and we thrived in that community. We had friends and relatives, loved ones. We worked together, fought together, disagreed together, had picnics together, if I might use that term. We grew up on one side of the railroad track, and down that railroad track were blackberries that were very plentiful in June, and plums and peach trees, hickory nuts, all kinds of things that we could go and gather at different times of the year in large numbers. Sometimes several families would simply go to the woods, as we would call it, and gather nuts, bring them back home, and they would last us throughout the winter. We gathered very wonderful fruit called maypops. Loved maypops. They, as far as I'm concerned, they seem to have grown only in our section in Titusville in Birmingham. We could find peaches over there. No apple trees, but fig trees, scuppernongs, muscadines, all of those lovely fruit that we could just enjoy and enjoy and enjoy.
Now, how did black people get along? Describe the interrelationship, the education and so forth for black folk, for Negroes.
We went through elementary school. I went to Washington Elementary School. That was just on the outskirts of Titusville. From there, we went to Ullman High School, And when that was opened up, I went there, and after 1 year, I went to Parker High School. There was only one high school for Negroes in Birmingham, and that was Parker High School. That school was patterned after the works of Booker T. Washington. It was his idea to teach Negroes basic education and trades to use your hands with to make a living. So we got the regular ABCs, math, geometry, English, but then there were shops. There was a printing shop where you could learn how to use a printing press. There were tailor shops where you could learn, if you were interested in tailoring and make suits, you could learn the tailoring trade. There was an upholstering shop. If you were interested in that, you could go into upholstery. Practically every trade that you could want to go into were there, or was there, so that Negroes could learn a trade and then graduate from high school, and if they desired, become a printer or an upholsterer or tailor. And this was Booker T. Washington's concept of letting down your bucket where you are. And the principal of that school was Dr. A.H. Parker.
Black man?
Black man, yes.
All your teachers were black?
All teachers were black. Everybody in the school system in the Negro section of town were all black. Students and teachers, administrators, etc., all black.
Was there a lot of crime in your community and violence?
Almost no crime, no.
Talk about that. Why? How?
Well, we knew each other. Nobody could think about a crime. We played football together. We played baseball together. I knew the Hoods, and the Hoods knew us. I knew the Millers, and the Millers knew us. We grew up together. We didn't think about murder. Just never came into. I don't recall ever hearing of a murder in Titusville. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you may wonder why I'm saying Titusville. I have to explain. It's Titusville. And when you grow up there, you have to learn how to say that right. And if you say Titusville, you're not from Titusville. Mm. So there's just a way that it rolls out, Titusville. You're from there if you can say that. Mm-hmm. If you're not from there, you get embarrassed and you don't know what you're saying, so you pronounce it wrong, and then you give out that you're not from Titusville.
Mm. Now, was that typical Negro communities in the South, like what you grew up in, that was typical?
I think it was typical because wherever I went in the South, I went to Mississippi, life was practically the same there. Negroes, descendants of slaves, living together, going to school, through elementary school, through high school. There was an element of gang activity in some of those schools. I know my mother sent me to one of those schools, and boy, those guys were tough. And I think my mother realized that when I came home, I was in such shock that she put me in another school where I didn't have to fight toughs to get to school and back from school. That's what I remember about Mississippi, but I never had that experience in Birmingham. If it came to a fight between Negroes, it was just a fair fight. You fight with your fists, and whoever wins won. You're friends afterwards. And no gangs to worry about. It was basically a good kind of life that we just didn't find in the North. You had gangs here, you had crimes here, you had killings here. That really was not life as I experienced it in the South. Everybody seemed to get along, and if you had a disagreement and you needed to fight, you fought. And whoever won, won, and then you go on about your business and forget it and move on to the next item. But it was never, we never resorted to gang activity to get even with someone or to have protection. We all had homes. Some were better homes than others, but it was a home. And everyone came up in a home. And that was the kind of life I grew up with.
You mentioned Booker T. Washington. That era. Do you know anything about that era and kind of what was taking place, when, where, how?
Well, my only experience of that era is Parker High School, because it was there.
What year are we talking about?
1935 to say 1950.
Okay, but Booker T. Washington would have been
He was
from
prior to my time.
1860, say 90 to 1915, just after emancipation. And the reason why I was going to ask you if you could talk a little bit about the transition of Negroes from slavery to freedom and what that would have been like as you come to understand that. What did black folk do? How did they do it? And what was happening to them?
Well, Booker T. Washington died before, I would say 10 years before I came on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
But the effects of his work was carried on at Parker High School. Dr. A.H. Parker was a disciple of Booker T. Washington. And
was he trained by Booker?
I don't know where his training was from, but he had that big school in Birmingham, one high school for Negroes.
Mm-hmm.
So in my day, everybody, when I leave Birmingham and go elsewhere and meet people from Birmingham, if you went to Parker High, you knew someone there. Mm-hmm. And they knew that if you were in Birmingham, you went to Parker High School. It was first known as Industrial High School, and when A.H. Parker became the principal, it was called the Parker High School, named after him, after he, I think it was after he died. And Robert Johnson was the principal there when I was there, Negro. His daughter became the wife of Colin Powell, but she went through Parker High School, and that was one of the things that I noticed in the schools there. And after I came north the second time, I didn't notice that, was that the principal was glad to see a parent.
Mm.
See, the principals, the parents, and the students were it was a triangle. So if the principal had a problem with a student, then he needed the parent there. But the student knew that if the parent had to take off from work to go to school because of some foolishness of the child, then that child was in trouble. So if the teacher had to bring a child to the principal, and the principal couldn't solve it and he had to call the parents, then the parents would come. And then the principal would more than likely turn the kid over to the parents. And when they got through with him, he was okay. It was just as simple as that. Mm-hmm. But it was different when I came up here. I came up here in 1965. I had been used to schools where I could go in and see the principal. The principal was happy to see a parent. I knew Robert Johnson, went to the same church, First Congregational Church in Birmingham, where I was a member. I knew the principal at Ullman High, George Bell. I knew practically all of the teachers because we would see them at church, at school, shopping area. But when I came up here, you never saw your teachers after 3 o'clock or after the school was over. They went to other parts of New York City. They didn't live in Bedford-Stuy or in Harlem. They would come to the school and teach and go back. So there was a gap between the teachers and the pupils. And there was no way to make that up the way the system was geared. And I remember having to, when I moved up here in 1965, my second son, Paul, was doing so well in school that he was 3 years ahead of students on the national level in mathematics. He was doing so good in an all-Negro school in Birmingham. But when we came to New York City, he was flunking math in less than a year. And I decided I will go to the school to see if I can see the principal and find out what's happening to my son. So I did. And some of the staff there told me, well, you can't see the principal, what do you want? We can take care of it. I said, no, I'd like to see the principal. I said, well, you can't see the principal. Then it was near the closing time of school, so I decided, well, I'll just sit here and wait for the principal. So I sat down, and in about 15 minutes, they produced the principal.
Mm-hmm.
I told the principal that my son is not doing well in math, and when he was in Birmingham, he was 3 years ahead of the national average in math, and now he's flunking math.
Mm.
So I said, I want to see his homeroom teacher. So the principal took me to see the homeroom teacher, and I spoke to him with my concerns, about my concerns, and he said, your son is doing fine. And I said, my son's doing fine? He's not bringing homework? He's failing math, and you say he's doing fine? And that was it. I didn't say anything more to the teacher. I knew something else was going on. And I had to try to do something about that. And that was, I was a member of District 17 at that time. I was a member of this part of the school board. I had been chosen to serve on school board of District 17. But this disturbed me so much that I knew in my heart and mind that something had to be done about this. And it was in this frame of mind that I was asked to serve on the governing board of the Ocean Hill-Brownsville Experimental School District.
Mm-hmm.
And so I accepted.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to do something to make it so that young people would not ever have to flunk and have a homeroom teacher say that he's doing fine. We tried that. But the UFT, as you know, defeated our efforts to teach our children and to make it so that they would have more teachers in the district that they could see, understand, aspire to become one. All of that was not there, and we tried to bring that there, and we were eventually labeled as anti-Semites because of an action that we were accused of taking, but we did not. That, I mean, we were accused of firing teachers without due process. We never fired any teachers. We simply transferred them to the Central Board of Education, and they kept their jobs and went somewhere else. But they chose, and the union chose, to bring them back to the district. And that was the beginning of the turmoil in Ocean Hill-Brownsville.
Well, let's when you say that y'all had the power to transfer them, let's go back, because initially there was no community board. So we need to get a backdrop. We need to get some background as to how that developed, why it developed, and who was involved, as much as you can remember, in establishing the Ocean Hill-Brownsville community movement that brought about community control. Why? Let's start with why.
Well, there were community people who saw that black people now, I can say black now, we're in the 60s, and the word Negro has gone into hiding, and
Into
the term
remission.
now, yeah, remission, and the term now is blacks. There were community leaders, Father Powers, for one, Rhoda McCoy, Walter Lynch, several, Al Van, Jitu Uyusi, who saw what was happening to the children and sought to do something to break through that so they could get to teaching the children.
What were some of the things happening to the children?
Not being taught, not learning, no rapport with the teachers. The teachers and the union seemed to feel that there was something mentally wrong with kids who wouldn't sit down and be nice when white people spoke to them. And it was just not a good feeling in the schools on the part of the teachers to the students and the students to the teachers. Discipline was a very great problem. The teachers didn't know how to discipline black children, didn't understand, and didn't care to find out. I'm speaking in general terms, not everyone, but in general terms, this was the situation here. And we felt, or rather, G2 and Alvan were able to see that the UFT was bringing teachers here, or bringing people here, who could get into the school system and teach black kids and get a start in the education system. And after they got tenure, they could move out and go to other areas and move on up the ladder in the education system. But they were using the black kids as stepping stones for them to come here from Eastern Europe and make a living here. So black children were their living. And this was one thing that we wanted to try to stop and not allow our children to be the pawns of other ethnic groups who would come here and rise on their backs. So the Board of Education, with all the dissatisfaction with these things that were happening to the kids, the Board of Education and the UFT and the Ford Foundation came up with a plan to try to see if they could find a way to satisfy the complaints of those who says we don't have any Negro principals or black principals, we don't have black teachers, our children are isolated from their teachers, they only see them at school time and then they don't see them anymore. And in order to correct some of these inequities, these three groups, Board of Ed, UFT, and the Ford Foundation came together to work out a plan, and they came up with a district that consisted of about 7 schools in the Ocean Hill-Brownsville area. And it was decided that they would let a group, a governing board, govern these schools. Another one was set up in Harlem, and another one in the Two Bridges area in Manhattan.
Mm-hmm.
And these three entities were to help bring changes in the education of inner city youth, mainly black youth.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it started.
Were there a lot of black teachers? And
Almost none,
okay, what was the education like?
and no black principals.
No black principals and almost no black teachers.
Almost no black teachers, no black principals, and the list of supervisory personnel was so long that there would be about 800 more white people who could become principal before you could get a black one on. So that was years away.
Mm-hmm.
That was what the situation was when Ocean Hill-Brownsville began.
Mm. And there was a lot of fighting among black children, each other. There was no learning. How was it?
Not fighting. When the governing board took over, they were able to make it so that teachers could gain a respect. Pardon me, the students could gain a respect for the teachers.
No, I mean fighting amongst themselves.
Mhm.
Kids fought a lot among themselves.
Yes, however, that was when the whites were running the schools,
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't know why they were fighting, and they didn't know what to do to stop it, because they were not bringing the parents into the schools. They were running the schools themselves without the parents. And so there was no way for them to solve that. So that's how they developed the 600 schools for these unruly black children.
Mm-hmm.
And their method was to label them as hyperactive children who needed to be put in special schools so they could learn by themselves. That was the UFT answer for black youth who didn't have the respect for whites that they thought they should.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the whites didn't earn it. You have to earn respect. You can't think that your skin color will demand respect for you. It did not. And so they put these three groups together, and the plan was that Samuel Wright would become the president of the governing board. Mm-hmm. And the principal at 271 would become the unit administrator over the whole school, or rather the whole school system. But it just so happened that there was one majority black vote on the governing board. The community people and teachers, and they had an extra black vote. And with that extra black vote, they elected me as chairman of the governing board instead of Sam Wright, who was an assemblyman at the time. And then they elected Rhoda McCoy as the unit administrator instead of Jack Bloomfield, who was the principal at 271. And that was the end of the experiment then, because it was supposed to have been under union control. Sam Wright was with the union and working with the union, and with him as chairman of the board, the union and the UFT would be together with Sam Wright. And with Jack Bloomfield as the unit administrator, they would control the whole district. Mm. And it would look like they're doing something for the community, but in reality, they had set it up that it would be controlled by the UFT, the Board of Education, but not the Ford Foundation. So the governing board chose me as chairman instead of Sam Wright, and they chose Rhoda McCoy as the unit administrator instead of Jack Bloomfield. And on the first day that school opened in 1967, the teachers really revolted against those who were elected leadership, the elected leadership of the governing board. And they would not allow Father Powers and I to make a presentation to them. We called, Rhoda McCoy called all of the school personnel together and asked Powers, Father Powers, and I to speak to them. And when we went to the first school, they shouted us down. We couldn't make a presentation. So we didn't try any further. We had to report back to McCoy that they were not, didn't want to hear us. So McCoy was able to call enough together those who were interested to come and speak with us, and we did. And they elected people, representatives from the schools to the governing board to represent the teachers.
Where did all the violence come in, and how? What precipitated the violence that we saw on television, where white teachers were against the blacks, and the parents and community seemed to be at odds with the UFT? And by the way, the statement which Shanker made, how did that arrive, and can you talk about that and sum all that?
Now, which statement are you talking about?
That blacks should not be taught African history.
Oh, well, I don't have the exact quotation. I've been trying to find that. I have a news article in which that is referred to, but I've been trying to find the exact quote from Shanker. But it is believed that he felt that when blacks learned their own history, they would not be good Americans, and he would downplay black history to make it so that blacks would blend into the system and become better students and better Americans. That was all false, and I think that was basically where Shanker was coming from, and apparently he felt he had the power to do that. But the struggle, when you say violence, there were strong speeches that people made, but I don't know that there was a lot of violence. I don't think so. There was, I remember a gentleman being there who was trying to incite violence, but we saw through him, and he did not carry the day. But he was trying to create violence so the TVs could capture the violence and place that all around the world. But the disagreements came after the governing board transferred 17 teachers and 2 supervisory personnel to the Board of Education and told them to report there. And the UFT took that to mean that we fired them, and they blamed us for firing them, and Shanker called a strike against the school, against the district. And that there were 3 strikes. That was in 1968 that Shanker led against the school to try to dismember the governing board. However, we survived it all and went through the year and were there until the following year.
Now, Reverend Otto, we kind of skipped ahead, but I really want to go back to Birmingham, Alabama. And how did you get involved, and when did you get involved in the boycott of stores? What brought it about in Birmingham? And
well, we have to go back beyond that boycott. My involvement. My commitment to doing something about the injustices of segregation took a very serious turn when, in January 1948, a black minister, 63-year-old black Baptist minister, well thought of in the Negro community, was shot in the white neighborhood, and the police accused him of being a peeping Tom in the white neighborhood. Well, in the black community, we knew that he was very successful in getting Negroes to register and vote.
Mm-hmm.
And that was bad at that time. That was in 1948.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to see him when he was in the funeral parlor in Ensley, Alabama. And as I stood over him, deeply hurt and wounded, that here was a minister of God killed by the police in Birmingham and accused of being a peeping Tom. And he was well respected in the black community. He was loved. He had raised 13 children. So he was not that kind of person. So when I stood over him in that funeral home in Ensley, Alabama, I said to myself and to God that if something is not done about this, then one day you will lie here and that will be the end of you. So I was ready for whatever came along to strike a blow at segregation. I was ready to do it. And so a few months later, in May of that same year, an interracial group had scheduled an interracial meeting in Birmingham, the Southern Negro Youth Congress. And they were going to come there and hold a few days of meetings in Birmingham that would be integrated. And Bull Connor said, "You're not going to do that."
They didn't allow black and white to meet together?
No, unless you had signs separating the races. That was the law in Birmingham. That ordinance was passed in 1944, the height of the war in Europe. Birmingham passed that law, which said that there had to be strict separation of the races in every public meeting. And so we did not do that, and we had a meeting before the police found out where we were. But when they found out where we were, they came and told us that we could not meet there because we were violating the segregation code. And they told us to disperse. So we refused to disperse. And then they arrested us. They arrested Methodist minister James Dombrowski. They arrested me. And they arrested another white man, Eddie Forey from Massachusetts, and a white woman, Doris Sink from New York City. And we went to jail in May 1948. And the next day, Senator Glenn Taylor was to come there and speak. But the group had decided that we are not going to segregate. And if you insist on having segregation, we will open up the back entrance for whites. And the front entrance will be for Negroes. And so that was a small Christian and Missionary Alliance church there in Birmingham, 1 block from the 16th Street Baptist Church. So we had the meetings there. When Bull Connor knew that we had cut down the weeds in the back of the church to make it the white entrance, I'm sure he must have been upset at that. However, Senator Glenn Taylor, a senator from Idaho, was scheduled to speak that Sunday, I think the 2nd or 3rd of May. And when he came, he went to the front entrance. And there was a police there telling him that he had to go to the back entrance. And he attempted to go into the front entrance, and they yanked him off of the front porch of the church and took him and arrested him, charged him with violating the segregation code. That was the beginning, I would say, of breaking down, or one of the beginnings of breaking down of public segregation in Birmingham, because in effect, Bull Connor enforced, he forced white people to go to the back entrance. And I'm sure he knew that he could not tell Negroes to go to the back door of their church. And so this is how it happened. But to the boycott in Birmingham, we're skipping over, that was in 1948. The boycott didn't come till 1962.
From 48 to 62?
Yes. See,
Did you stay involved all the time?
no, as soon as I did that, I was working at a place where my father worked, at the Anderson Dry Cleaners. I was a presser and a dry cleaner. But the Klan put pressure on the owner, Mr. Doss, and told him that he had to get rid of me. So he let me know that he couldn't keep me because the Klan would be on his case. So I was let go. My father sent me to another friend that he knew, and he gave me a job as a presser. But as soon as the Klan found out that, they came there and told him, you got to let Oliver go. Then my father sent me to a Negro dry cleaner, and he hired me. But when the Klan found out about that, they got to him, and he said he had to let me go also. And that meant that all doors were closed to me to work in Birmingham. And that happened in 1948, and it's never changed. I've never been able to get a job in Birmingham since 1948.
Yeah.
So that was the economic thrust. If you get out of line, we put the economic thrust on you and destroy you. And so they all work opportunity was shut. So I came to Brooklyn, New York, and worked as a presser here down on Fulton Street, and worked a year and saved money to go to seminary, and went to seminary and pressed my way through seminary, and got my master's in church history, and then went into the ministry of the Orthodox Presbyterian Church and served the church in northern Maine for about 7 years. But there was no way for me to get to get a job in any secular agency anywhere. And I've never been able to get a job in a secular agency anywhere in my life after 1948. And so I can only say that if it was not for the church, I would not have been able to have an income in the United States of America.
Did you go back to Birmingham?
I went back to Birmingham in 1959. My father died in 1959, so I went back there, and that was the only place I could go. All doors had been shut to me. So I went back there and tried to make the best of life there. And got involved with the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights with Reverend Shuttlesworth, and worked with them for 6 years, and was part of the struggle there.
Talk about Reverend Shuttlesworth for a moment, so we get a kind of in-depth overview of who he was and what he was about.
Reverend Shuttlesworth was a fearless Baptist minister in Birmingham, Alabama, who had no fear whatsoever of Bull Connor. And he challenged segregation time and time again, sitting on buses and getting arrested, going into eating places and getting arrested. He just got arrested again and again and again, and he was able to gather a following of clergy and people, ordinary people, working people, who would be with him in the struggle. I learned from his present wife, and I didn't know this hadn't heard this when I was down in Birmingham, that he actually put Bull Connor on trial and was questioning Bull Connor, and Bull Connor did not want to answer questions from a Negro, and in particular not Fred Shuttlesworth. But Fred Shuttlesworth would ask the judge to please instruct the client to answer the question, and the judge made Bull Connor answer the question. Now Fred put Bull Connor through that. He's he's ready for the struggle. So he led the struggle there fearlessly, though the church was bombed and his home was bombed, and he was attacked and beaten almost unconscious when he took his children to register to go to Phillips High School. He was fearless, and in my working with him, there are two things that I remember him saying on a TV program that's called Who Speaks for Birmingham. Fred made this statement very pointedly, that we intend to kill segregation or be killed by it. And that was a program that Edward R. Murrow came to Birmingham to do. But while he was there in a motel room, and I was there at the time, Kennedy called him and asked him if he would head up the USIA. And he agreed to accept it that same night where I had first met him. And so that meant that he would not do a documentary on Birmingham, but it fell to the lot of David Lowe to do that documentary. And he did, and I was able to put him in contact with students at Miles and people in the Alabama Christian movement so he could interview them. And it was through me that Reverend Shuttlesworth was on that program.
Through you?
It was through me that I made the contact with Lowe to contact him to ask him to come and be on that program. So you have copies of that here. But that's a historic document. Another thing I remember about Reverend Shuttlesworth was that he said that if God tells him to jump, he's going to jump. It's God's problem to find out where he lands. And he really meant that. If God told him to jump, he would jump and leave it up to God to find somewhere for him to land. But he was a fearless fighter, and he was the main agent in breaking down segregation in Birmingham, Alabama.
Reverend Shuttlesworth?
Reverend Shuttlesworth. I do not discredit or downplay the work of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, but he was a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he was the one who invited Dr. King to come to Birmingham. So, and he was one of the key leaders in Birmingham. There was a struggle to displace him and get him out of the way, a struggle between the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights that Reverend Shuttlesworth led and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference led by Dr. King. The public doesn't know that there was a war going on with those two organizations. And while that war was going on, they were breaking down the walls of segregation also. But Reverend Shuttlesworth was a towering figure, and it will take perhaps many decades, maybe centuries, for what he did in Birmingham to keep unfolding and changing Alabama for the better and changing the world for the better.